Hey, we're going to be in John chapter 1 today. So if you brought a Bible, you can meet me in John chapter 1. If you need a Bible, there's some paperback ones right underneath the seats in front of you, and there's a table of contents in the front that'll help you locate the gospel according to John. It's one of four accounts of the life and the teaching of Jesus. We're going to be in John chapter 1, zeroing in on verse 14, 15, 16, and 17 today. Well, tomorrow being Christmas Eve is the anniversary of one of my favorite Christmas memories. It happened 13 or 14 years ago. I was home with my parents for Christmas that year. It was right before we started this church. It was like the last Christmas that I got to go home and have a normal Christmas with family. And so we went to the Christmas Eve service, and before we lit the candles and sang Silent Night, which you do at the Christmas Eve service, the minister offered some reflections on the meaning of Christmas, as you would kind of expect to happen at Christmas Eve. And he said something to the effect of it. He read the Christmas story of Jesus' birth and then said something to the effect of it. It really doesn't matter if he was born this way or not. The important thing is that every day Jesus can be born into our hearts. And then he said, this is a mystery we can't fully understand, but if we will embrace the mysterious, life will come into the world through us and through Jesus being born into our hearts. So it was raining that night, and so my dad and I went to get the car and to drive around and pick up Mom and the kids. And as we got into the car, my dad looked at me and he goes, "That was a bunch of," a word I can't say in church that starts with bull and ends with it. And he wasn't just making an offhand comment. My dad knew that I was, going to become a preacher, and so he was like saying, he's like taking a little dig. He was like saying to me, is this not what you preachers do? You take these ancient stories and you try to like gussy them up and make them mean something, and it all ends up sounding kind of mysterious and nebulous. And I said, actually, I agree with you, Dad. I don't think that was Christianity. Now, I did not mean that to be dismissive to the preacher. I can identify with needing to come up with something to say on Christmas Eve. I did not mean to be dismissive or insulting to the preacher. I simply meant it as a statement of fact. I don't think that was Christianity. As a statement of fact. In the same way, I might say, I'm not a kangaroo, and I throw no shade on kangaroos when I say that. I mean, who among us would not want to hop like that and carry your kids in a pouch? I would guess that right now at the airport there's some parents with 2 kids, 2 car seats, 2 strollers who wish they were kangaroos. Being a kangaroo can be a very good thing, but I'm not a kangaroo. Kangaroos are not humans. Humans are not kangaroos. It's just a fact. In the same way, Christianity is a particular thing. Just as there is an irreducible essence of kangarooness without which you're not a kangaroo, there is an irreducible essence of Christianity without which you've just got something else. Christianity is based on the actions and the teachings of a person, a specific person named Jesus, and it's based on the teachings of the people who he personally trained, who he called the disciples. Then he called them after that the apostles. Apostles is a word that means officially commissioned messengers. In other words, if you were to change Jesus' teaching or to misrepresent the actions of Jesus or to misunderstand the meaning of the birth of Jesus, or you were to believe something that's not what the apostles, the officially commissioned messengers of Jesus believed and what they taught, even if you call it Christianity, it's not, factually speaking. You haven't changed Christianity or come up with a new kind of Christianity. You just have something that's not Christianity, factually and historically speaking. Just like if I don't hop and carry my kids in a pouch, I'm not a new kind of kangaroo. I'm just not a kangaroo. Now, here's why this is important. It's possible to think we're believing or embracing something that's Christianity that's actually something else. There's another reason this is important, and this is probably the one that I find most important these days when I talk to people. It's possible to reject something that's not Christianity and think you're rejecting Christianity. It's possible to go, I don't believe in Christianity, but the Christianity you don't believe in is not Christianity. It would be like holding up a kangaroo and going, I don't believe in humans. And it's not really a human that you're disbelieving in, it's a kangaroo. So I would guess that some of us were raised in a Christianity and maybe we've left it, or we said, I don't want anything to do with that anymore. And the Christianity we've left is just a kangaroo. It's not Christianity. In fact, one of the things that people experienced in the ministry of Jesus, there was a whole group of people in Israel, they were called sinners. And it wasn't just like a smear word, it was actually just a category of people. And this category of people were people who had decided that they were kind of done with the official Judaism of their day. They weren't going to try to live by the law. They weren't going to go to temple for all the ceremonies. They were just kind of done with it all. And they were called the sinners. And they were the people that were most attracted to the ministry of Jesus. And what they discovered in Jesus is that it felt safe to come back, but they also discovered that what they were coming back to was not the same thing they left. They discovered in Jesus that what they had left was a not God. And what they were coming back to was God as He really is. That continues to happen over and over again. I talk to people who, when they discover what Jesus actually taught and what He actually did and the actual meaning of His life and His death and His resurrection and even the meaning of His birth, and when we talk to people who discover what His apostles actually taught, they go, you know what, that's actually good. That's actually something I could want to embrace. And so they come back, but what they're coming back to is not the same thing that they left. So one of the most important questions you can ask is, what is Christianity? And who is Jesus? Like the original Jesus. And how would I even know who Jesus is and what Christianity is? And that's why I love Christmas this time of year, and that's why I love the passage that we're going to look at today. Christmas is literally going back to the start of the life of Jesus. That's what we do. And so Christmas is an opportunity to go back and to take a fresh look and to look again with fresh eyes and to ask again, now who is Jesus? And it's also why I love the passage that we're going to look at today. This passage is written by a guy named John, who was one of the first followers of Jesus. In fact, he was considered by many to be Jesus' closest friend. He was described as the disciple whom Jesus loved. When Jesus was on the cross, he looked at John and he looked at his mother Mary, and he said to John, behold, your mother, which was a way of saying, you're now going to treat her as your mother. You're going to take care of her as if she's your mother. That's how close of a friend he was to Jesus. And so John wrote this gospel according to John as an older man, and his thought process went something like this. I'm going to die. And I learned all this stuff directly from Jesus, and I saw all this stuff as I followed Jesus for 3 years. And I want future generations to be able to see and to be able to learn exactly what I learned from Jesus. I don't want to have to guess who Jesus is. I don't want to have to guess what Christianity is. That word didn't even exist at the time. He just goes, I want people to know who Jesus is, and who better to hear from than me? I'm his best friend. So he wrote this gospel according to John, which means if you want to see what Christianity is, you don't have to just trust a church or trust a preacher, and you can even clear through like 2,000 years of stuff, and you can go back to the original source, his best friend. So today, I want to show you how he describes Jesus and what that must mean about what Christianity is and what Christianity is not. I want to try to help us see it with fresh eyes. Now, the section we've been looking at all through Advent is sometimes called the prologue of the Gospel of John, or just the introduction. It's the section that covers the first half of chapter 1, where he kind of sets up and introduces all the major themes, and then we're going to see these themes unfold as he describes the life, teaching, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so we're going to look today, especially at verses 14, 16, and 17. And to get the context, I want to just read the whole thing, and then we'll sneak up on it as we get there. So it goes like this in John chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This is another John, who was sometimes called John the Baptist. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And here's our part today. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." And from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Now, I want you to look at verse 16. From his fullness, we've all received grace upon grace. John is actually saying something that's even more fulsome than we might realize as we read that. And so I want to help you hear it like John intended it and like his original readers would have read it. John's original audience was probably Jewish people who had grown up outside of Israel in the Greco-Roman world. They were sometimes called Hellenistic Jews. They were people who were ethnically and religiously Jewish. They had been maybe raised with the customs of Judaism. They had been taught the scriptures, but they were raised outside of Israel, and so culturally they were also Greek. They were like an immigrant community that takes on many of the customs of their new home, but they also retain many of the customs of their old home. And so they eat kosher and they cheer for the Lakers. You know, that's who they are. And so he's writing for these folks to tell them about what had happened. They had begun to hear rumors about this Jesus guy who had had this 3-year popular ministry in Israel and then was crucified, and there was rumors of his resurrection. And John says, "Hey, I knew him. I'm going to write and tell you what he was about." And the phrase he uses here, grace upon grace, literally read to them in Greek, grace in place of grace, or grace in exchange for grace. Or if you're reading a New International Version, they render it grace in place of grace already given. A few years ago, I was driving in the mountains, and as I was cruising down a mountain pass outside of Estes Park, I saw black rubber flying through the air, and I thought, that's interesting. And then I realized it's my tire. And so I pulled over, and my tire was shredded. And so I put the spare on, and I drove down the hill and back to Denver and straight to Discount Tire, from whence I had bought the tires. And I showed them the shredded tire, and they said, "That's not right." And I said, "I know, and that's why I'm here." And then they looked it up, and they said, "It's actually under warranty." And they said, "In fact, here's what we'll do. We'll just change out all of your tires for new tires." And so I gave them my 4 old tires, including the shredding one, and they gave me 4 brand new tires back. So what I got was tires in place of tires. I traded tires. I got better tires back. I wasn't sad to see the old tires go, because the new tires were even better. From his fullness, we've all received a better, newer, fuller form of grace in exchange for an old form of grace. That's what they heard. And then John gives an explanation, and when you heard the explanation, you might have gone, how did he sneak the law in there? Why is he talking about Moses and the law? So here's the explanation. For, that's an explanation word, for the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. In other words, John is saying the law is the old form of grace, and this grace and truth that came through Jesus Christ, that's the new form of grace. From his fullness, we've all received a new, better form of grace in exchange for an old form of grace, law. That's what Jesus means. In fact, the whole paragraph from verse 14 to 18 is basically saying Jesus is a fuller, more perfect, robust completion of what God gave Israel under Moses. It's like an extended little meditation and comparison of Jesus versus Moses. And so in verse 14, when they read, "The Word became flesh and dwelled among us," the word dwelt is literally the word tabernacled. The tabernacle was the place in Moses' ministry where God manifested his glory and his presence among the people. So John is saying the Word became flesh and created a new tabernacle among us, a new manifestation of God's glory and God's presence. And it's better than the old. In fact, the whole paragraph is an allusion to one of the most famous incidences in Moses' ministry. And the incident went like this. Right after God gave the law and the tabernacle to Moses, Moses was up on the mountain called Mount Sinai. He was up on the mountain for 40 days receiving all of this. And during the 40 days that he was up there, Israel starts to go, "Where is this Moses? And where is this God?" And so they take all their gold jewelry, they give it to Aaron, their priest, and Aaron melts the gold jewelry down and he fashions all their gold into a big golden calf, a big image of their God. And the people look at this big golden calf that they've made using their jewelry and that their priest has made for them, and they say, "These are the gods that brought us out of Egypt," which was, number one, not true, and number two, a violation of the law that they had just gotten a month earlier that began like this. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or in the earth beneath." In other words, God was saying through the law, you can't make me into whatever you imagine me to be or you want me to be. I am who I am, and I'm not who I'm not. So just as there are kangaroos and there's not kangaroos, and there's Jesus and there's not Jesus, there's Christianity, there's not Christianity, there's God and there's not God. There's no such thing as another God or a new kind of God. So 40 days after they've been given the law, 40 days after they'd been given the instructions to create the tabernacle so God's presence could dwell among them, the people made a not God and they worshiped it. That's Exodus chapter 32. And then in Exodus chapter 33, God decides to destroy the people. He says, "I'm going to just do away with these people and start over. I'm going to start over with you, Moses." And Moses risked his life to go in and meet with God and plead with God not to cast these people off and not to start over, but to take these people back as his people, even though they've worshipped not God. And God, in response to Moses' plea, God gives them grace and takes them back as his people. That's Exodus chapter 33. And then Moses asked God if he could see God's glory. Most who read this account believe that Moses is asking for a manifestation of God's glory as a guarantee that he's going to make good on his promise to take these people back. So Moses is like saying, "Okay, thanks for the promise. Now, could I have a guarantee of that?" And God, in his grace, manifests himself to Moses. Here's how it goes in Exodus chapter 33. "But he, God, said, 'You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live.' And the Lord said, 'Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I pass by. And then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen.'" So the image is this: like, you can't see me. It would be too much for you. You could not see me and live. We'll talk about that next week. You could not see me and live, but here's what I'll do. I'll hide you in a crevice of a rock, and I'll put my hand over you, and then I'll pass by, and then after I've passed by, as I'm moving away, you can see me going away. You can see my backside. And even that would be an amazing display of God's glory. So God did just that. He hides Moses in the rock. He shows him his backside. And as he passes by Moses, here's what he says in Exodus chapter 34. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. This is right after the people have rebelled against him. And God says, I'm a God who's merciful and gracious and slow to anger. He also says, I don't just do away with guilt, so we'll have to figure out how that works later. But he says, I'm a slow to anger. And then he goes, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And if you take that phrase, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, and translate it into Greek, it's full of grace and truth. That's what John is alluding to when he says twice, full of grace and truth. So here's the story. When Israel rebelled against God by creating a not God, God responded with steadfast love and faithfulness, full of grace and truth. And he let Moses see a glimpse of his glory as a guarantee that he's full of grace and truth. And John says, now he's done something even better, even more full than that. He's replaced that for something else. He's taken that picture of grace and he's given us a new picture of grace in place of that picture of grace, grace upon grace. That's Christianity. That's who Jesus is. In fact, John is saying this is not just a fascinating twist on Jewish history. He did this for the whole world. What he did once for Israel under the ministry of Moses, where they had a confused, not God, and rather than just casting them off, he gives them actually a clearer picture of himself, and he takes them back as his people, grace. What he's done for Israel, he's actually now doing for all humanity. He's manifesting who he is and what he's like to a humanity that over and over and over again creates multiple varieties of not gods and worships them. And it means he's full of grace and truth. Now, let me help you see what this means about what Christianity is and what Christianity is not. So that you can see if you have a Christianity or if you've rejected Christianity or if you've just rejected some kangaroo version. First of all, this means that Christianity is not moralism. Moralism is when you reduce Christianity to moral principles, like you've got to live right, you've got to live well. People who are steeped in moralism will say things like you've got to live right, you've got to walk the straight and narrow, you've got to really commit. People who grow up in moralism will often say things like, I just can't be a good Christian. The good Christian thing is just not for me. I'm just not a good Christian. I can't be. Here's what you should know. That's not Christianity. Christianity is about salvation for people who are not good Christians. And it comes by grace. In fact, it comes by grace upon grace. It comes by the fullness of God's steadfast love and faithfulness, his grace and truth. It doesn't come by living right. Albert Mohler, who is a Southern Baptist theologian, which just means don't invite him to your party, says that moralism is one of the most prominent forms of not Jesus, not Christianity that infects the church. And it often goes by the name Christian values. In an article he wrote about this, he cited a mother who wrote a letter to an advice column in the Washington Post because her daughter had abandoned Christianity. And so if your child abandons Christianity, probably what you should do is write to the advice column of the Washington Post. That's probably where you'll get some help. And so he quotes this article, and she writes, "I'm a stay-at-home mother of 4 who has tried to raise my family under the same strong Christian values that I grew up with. Therefore, I was shocked when my oldest daughter suddenly announced she had given up believing in God and decided to come out as an atheist." Moeller goes on to suggest Christian values are the problem here. Christian values cannot save anyone and never will. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not Christian values, and a comfortability with Christian values can blind sinners to their need for the gospel. You hear what he's saying? He's saying we need something better than Christian values. What Jesus came to give us was not values to live by. The message of his apostles, his officially commissioned messengers, is not, here's the values you've got to teach your children. We have something better than that. We have the fullest expression of grace that replaces even an older expression of grace. Did you notice, by the way, that John does not call the law just things to do? John calls the law God's old expression of grace. You know why? Because what was the history of the law? The history of the law was over and over and over again, the people didn't keep the law. Like 30 days after receiving the law, the people broke number 1 and number 2 and created a not God. So if the history of Israel tells us anything, it's that if people are given values to live up to, they won't be able to do it. And the law actually had grace in it. It had a sacrificial system for people who did not keep it. And even God taking the people back and giving them the law again was a manifestation of his grace. And John says, now we've got an even better form of grace. We've got grace in place of grace. So that means that Christianity is not just values. Christianity is grace, which saves us from our failure in many cases to live up to Christian values. So let me say something. If you've left Christianity, if you've left because you felt like you couldn't live up to it, if you've left because it had a moral code and you're like, I just don't want to live by that, you've not yet left what is really Christianity. You've just left some kangaroo version. And it starts with grace. This is why people, when they hear the teaching of Jesus and they hear the teaching of his disciples, go, oh, maybe Christianity is something different than what I imagine it to be. And maybe it would be like coming back to something that's different than what I left. Now, here's the second thing you should know. This means that Christianity is not mysticism. Mysticism is synonymous with something that's mysterious, something that's mystical, can't be understood or grasped with the mind. It's ethereal, it's slippery, it's fuzzy. Sometimes it kind of gives us a warm feeling, but we can't quite get our hands around it. Mysticism is what often manifests this time of year in pious spiritual talk, like the real meaning of Christmas is Christ being born into our hearts. The real meaning of Christmas is light coming out of us and into the world. That's kind of warm and sentimental and mystical. So I want you to notice that John's not describing a mystical experience. He's not describing some esoteric thing you've got to try to embrace the mystery of. What he's describing is a person. He's describing a specific person, a person who was born in space, time, and history, a person he knew. So he says in verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. We, there refers to John and the other disciples. Have seen means like, I knew him. His glory means what we knew of him was incredibly beautiful and attractive. So, the Word, who is the order of logic that holds everything together, that is kind of mysterious. But then it gets very unmysterious. He dwells among us, and we've seen him, and we've seen his glory. Christianity is not mysticism. It's about a person who can be studied and a person who can be known. That's the whole reason John's writing this gospel. He's writing so that you can think about and you can experience and you can wrestle with the teaching of Jesus just like he got to do for 3 years. He's like, I want to recreate that experience that I had for you. And it's not a mystical, esoteric experience. It's simply like take up and read and study this person. So if you're like skeptical of Christianity, if you're like, I just don't know that like I can get my mind around that, you don't have to suspend your intelligence. Christianity is just about trusting a real person who actually exists, a historical figure, Jesus. So before you reject it as kind of weird and mystical, you should at least understand the person. And it can be done by the testimony of the people who knew him. Some of us might be frustrated. We might feel like at times like, I feel like there's some secret that I don't have. In fact, a lot of like Christian books, this is kind of how they make their money. They promise that there's like this thing, and once you get this thing, this is the thing that's going to be the breakthrough. That's mysticism. There's no secret breakthrough. The only thing is this person and what he taught. And so growing as a Christian is not about discovering some secret. It's about discovering something that's not secret at all. It's been declared in public for 2,000 years and handed down to us through 2,000 years. It's as simple as studying the life and the teaching of this one person. So Christianity is not moralism and it's not mysticism. Christianity is about a person who embodies the fullness of God's steadfast love and faithfulness. In fact, this is not just an illusion, as John says. John paints this picture. It's not just an allusion to Israel's history, though it is. It's also an allusion to the full history of Jesus, which he's getting ready to unpack for us. Because here's what John is going to show us. Do you know where Jesus' glory is most fully seen? Do you know where the fullness of grace and truth is most fully manifest? Do you know where God's steadfast love and faithfulness is most displayed? Here's what we're going to learn in John chapter 12. This is Jesus praying right before he is getting ready to be crucified. And he prays this, "My soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I've come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven. "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd that stood there and heard it said that it had thundered. Others said an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out." That's where God dealt with the consequences of sin, by the way. "And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to show by what kind of death he was going to die. The way Jesus manifests his glory, the way Jesus shows how good God is, the way Jesus shows how beautiful he is, the way Jesus shows us the fullness of God's steadfast love and faithfulness, the way Jesus shows us grace upon grace, the way Jesus reconciles grace and truth, the way he reconciles God's mercy with God's justice, is on the cross. It's on his death. He's lifted up to display God's glory, and when he's lifted up, he's not lifted up to hover. He's lifted up in a way where he's nailed to a cross to absorb all the consequences of all the not gods that we've worshiped, so that we can be converted to God as he really is. That's Christianity. Let's pray. Father, we love you and we thank you that at this time when we celebrate the birth and the gift of your Son, you give us not just warm feelings and not just sentiment, but you give us a picture of your glory. You give us a fuller picture of your glory. You give us your steadfast love and faithfulness made most manifest in the birth of your Son in vulnerability, and then he became even more vulnerable than a baby when he became crucified. And so we thank you that you have given us this picture, and I pray that you would help each one of us embrace Jesus as he is and embrace Christianity as it is, to embrace the fullness of your grace and truth. Would you save us from moralism and mysticism? Father, those things are hard. It's hard to be good people. No one has ever succeeded except one. It's hard to figure out spiritual secrets. But it's pretty incredible that we get to know you by trusting in the grace given through your Son, and that the only secret to knowing you and to growing closer to you is to know him. And so we celebrate that now as we come to his table. We pray in Jesus' name and by his Spirit. Amen.